Hi, welcome back to Ino's channel. If you followed me through the first episode or the Japanese version or the Chinese version, no matter what it is, and then welcome back to now the second episode on reflections of 3 years in Japan. In the first episode, I talked about the three things that impressed me the most. Number one is a massively safe and reliable public system that enable independence of children. And number two is a living history that you can find everywhere, not only in buildings, in cities, and also in people's life. And number three is about a civil society and public infrastructure. All right, now move on to the second part, which are the three things that puzzles me, or three things that I think really challenges Japan. All right, so here we go. Number one is education, and in the fierce competition to go to top schools. This might be a bit of a counterintuitive because everybody know Japan has fewer children, is an aging society. You would have thought that their education is pretty relaxed, but actually quite the contrary. Because if you come to Japan, it's very hard to miss the advertisement boards everywhere, in the train, in the station, on the buildings. Those are jukus. Juku basically are cram schools. And cram schools is basically after school schools that families send their kids to. And they're like a kumens, but it's a much more systematic and massive. There are many brands, there are big chains, there are huge businesses. And I've actually been to one, sort of as part of my research. I just find them really depressing because they're usually renting a space in a giant office building, and then the entire wall are white, and there's like nothing like a school. And then kids as young as like second grade or third grade start going there to study. And then why do they study? Because they study to get ready for the entrance test for middle school, and then of course then to high school. And why is that, you may think? It's because, yes, although in general there are fewer kids, but if you want to go to a top university, then you have to go to the top high school, because the top high schools have a much higher chance of getting to top universities. And then sometimes, like some of the top high schools, maybe half their students can go to the top universities, which is, of course, a huge chance compared to other regular schools. And in order to get to those high schools, you have to go to their, middle school. Usually it's like it's a 6-year school, and then you have to get ready for the test that happens when you are 12 years old. And then in order to study for that, you start at third grade or so. This is like an entire chain. And why good university matters that much more, because again, from that, the graduate sort of certificate from those universities will grant you a job in a big company. And big company means a lot in a society, because then you can get all kinds of, like, you get respects. Also, you get even like lower interest, like if you get a loan or something. So this entire chain coming from the society kind of preference all the way down to second or third graders. And those are expensive because those are out of pockets, right? So basically it's like a shadow school system. You have to go if you want to go to that system, because the public school do not teach the stuff that they test in those entrance exams. So like you cannot just learn well in the public school and get ready. You have to go to that system, which is very problematic. And I think sometimes people kind of blame like urban mothers and saying, okay, it's the mothers that drive the anxiety. But I don't think that's right. I think mothers are merely responding to what they figure the society needs, right? Everybody wants their kids to be happy and to have a good future. I'm the same. So like then they would figure out the rule of the game and then to play by it. So like what the society should reflect is the rule of the game. So that's one. And I think the other, so it's very costly, create this kind of system with kind of favor the families with more money. And then I think there's some numbers showing, like if you now look at the top universities, almost 100% of them have gone through juku. So it means like it basically become a necessity, but it's paid out of pocket. So like, no, if you're poor, then your chance is low. But I think there's a secondary or even probably more important problem with this is that it kind of wears out your passion for learning. I have a friend who, was a Yale graduate, and he used to teach in Waseda, which is the top university in Japan. And he just find out how little interest the students have in learning because they've gone through years of juku and cram school. By the time they get to this university, which is a highly competitive selective process, they kind of like, why would I learn again? Which is like a big loss, isn't it? So like the point of, yeah. So the point of getting into a good university is so you can learn more and learn better. But like by the time all their passion have been worn out, and this is a big problem as well. So I think those are again rooted in the system, in the sort of the way talent is viewed and rated, and of course then trigger this giant industry of juku industry. I think there's a lot of very big companies that make a lot of money, and you almost see this almost like parallel education system very visible in Japan, and not only in big cities. Because I've traveled to see to look at education during part of my research, and even in very remote areas, you would always find some kind of cram school. So that's number one. Yeah. So in the first episode, I talked about how safe the city is. It is very safe. So if you go out to walk on the street around 9 p.m., you will see a lot of kids walking on their own. Like that's usually dismissal time for juku. So they would carry their big bag and walk back home on their own. So yes, it's safe, but the safety is used to go to cram schools, I think, which is a big waste. Not only a waste, but also kind of wearing out children's passion to learn. Of course, also wear out families' pocket. I think this is a big problem in Japan's education. So that's number one. And then number two is like this culture of fearing to fail. I think one big example is how the Japanese English education in a way has failed. Failed meaning like if you look at, I think there's data showing that if you look at an English proficiency or capability for all countries that's using English as a second language or learning English as a second language, Japan's ranking has constantly been dropping. And that's against the background that the government is constantly putting more money into the system. I think English learning used to be mandatory from sort of middle school up, and now it's pushed down to, I think, as low as 4th grade or even starting 2nd grade in public system. So there's a lot of effort and a lot of money being put in the system. So it's not like they don't want to learn. They want to learn and they put resources. But the general kind of at least speaking ability of English is very low. I think most Japanese can read and write good English. Now, especially with AI, that's less of a problem. But using English for communication actually takes someone to a bit of like shameless, right? So you have to, because you make a lot of mistakes. Like just that's why when I made this Japanese video, when I speak in Japanese, I know I make a lot of mistakes, but that's how you learn. You have to fail to learn, and you learn from failure. So if you're afraid of failing, then would basically block the main pathway of learning. And that culture and also very strong peer pressure of being perfect is everywhere in the society. So like that is very prevalent. So you feel this very silent but very tense sense of kind of pressure. That's kind of, you can just feel them among Japanese. And I think that's also pretty sad. But on the other hand, if you read, or I read Japan's history, that's not part of Japanese culture. If you think about Japan's kind of period of opening up and, kind of moving from a feudal society into a modern society that's around the time of Meiji Restoration, about 1860s, starting from then a few decades after. And there are many, many remarkable individuals, Japanese individuals, that kind of push that era forward. So, for example, Yoshida Shōin, he's a very famous kind of sort of a grassroots person who he taught a lot of person from the rural area in his tiny, like 8 tatami, small sort of pavilion, I would say, in a pretty remote area of Japan called Hagi. And then, half of the Meiji restoration sort of figures came from that little village or city. Yokosuka is pretty remote. And they're very open-minded, very adventurous. They want to see the world. They want to learn everything. They learn different language. Not Yoshida himself, but that generation. And also one of the most famous person on the 1,000 yen bill of Japan, called Fukuzawa Yukichi. Fukuzawa Yukichi. He's also like he went to the U.S. and he came back and write this book about how we should be more open. Like he had this famous quote that like the God doesn't create people above people, doesn't create people below people, like we're all equal. And then that whole sense of like every individual can be different, can make its own way out, and that's how society should move forward. It's very inspiring even today when you read them. So I don't think this is sort of the Japanese culture. I think that those two figures I mentioned, they are Japanese culture too. So they're there, but it kind of, I think during the recent decades, this whole juku thing kind of developed, frankly, actually much later. Because if you think about it, even the Japanese sort of economic boom happened in the 1970s to 1990s. That's the sort of the era of the Japan #1. But that entire generation that made it happen, like they were probably born in the 1940s, 50s, right? That's like right after the war. Like there's no juku, nothing. And then, but then this whole adventurous, this kind of forward-looking spirit, it's very prevalent in people from that generation. So like even today, when I meet Japanese, I think the more interesting people are the people who are in their 70s, who actually lived through that era, and they're much more open-minded. They're curious about the world. They want to make friends. They seem like spiritually much younger than the young people now. So, but like after it become a kind of a wealthy country, everybody try to keep their status. And then people want to go to the top schools, and then they create this kind of juku system to send their kids there. So like the more money is put in the system, more money is kind of, there's a higher cost on the family's bank account. But, it ends up with a worse outcome of education, and also kind of the social mentality, which I think is also not good. That's number 2. All right, now number 3 is on the women's status or gender imbalance. So Japan, among all the developed countries, has the lowest ranking when it comes to gender balance. I think OECD published this, a gender equality index. Japan has constantly rated very low. I think out of 140 something countries, Japan is 118, 119, something like that. Lower than many even developing countries. There's many data saying, like, if you look at Japanese women, participation in workplace is actually not that low. It's high. But the thing is that it's very different. Like, they participate in part-time jobs. They work in convenience stores. And very few women, I think, can get a full-time job, like the job that with full benefits. And that's majority goes to men. But Japanese women, all the ones I've met, are like the most diligent, hardworking, smart. There's no difference anywhere you see. So it's not like their capability issue. It's like structurally, there's so much expectation and workload put on women. So there is this index of like non-paid work, right? So I think worldwide, this ratio between women and men are like 2.6 times. It's already pretty high. This is published by UN Women. But in Japan, that ratio is like 5.6 like times of men. So like women just unproportionately take on most of the unpaid work. So like making it impossible for them to take a full-time job. I myself actually, if you've read my articles before, I After I graduated from, with a PhD, I worked at McKinsey, between U.S. and China. I was there for 10 years. By year 6, I made partner. And then during that time, I had 3 children. So, of course, it's very difficult. And I get a lot of help. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm very lucky, too. I have family support. I can afford a nanny and all that. But I think if I look at the workplace in Japan, I think if I were in Japan, then there's no way I would have made it, because the social expectation and the support infrastructure are different. Is expectation for women to be perfect at everything is very high. Like, you have to do the work, and I guess also do the unpaid job. But also on the other hand, the social support infrastructure is not very high, especially when you are working mother there. I mentioned in an earlier episode that I had a conversation with Artie Hochschild, who's a sociologist from UC Berkeley. She wrote 2 books. Well, she wrote many books, but 2 of them were translated to Chinese, and one is called The Second Shift, the other is called Time Bind. So both of them actually talked about the issue facing working women. Of course, this is based on in the U.S., and it's also written pretty early. Like, the first edition of Second Shift was written in 1982, and then they republished. Like, so the second edition, when Artie rewrote it and said, like, now looking back, what the book she wrote 30-something years ago, really still many of them still hold true, which is very depressing, right? So change is very slow. Time Bind is written in 1997. Also, that's before the internet time, but it also, like, the workplace dilemma facing women back then and looking at now is almost identical as well. So the change is very slow. In Japan, it's the same. So it's pretty bad to begin with, and also change also very slow. So, for example, I pay attention to this data and talking about how Tokyo University, which is sort of the best university of Japan, their ratio of female students is only about 20%, and they had a goal of increasing it to 30, but after 10 years having that goal, they're still at 20. I guess probably from 18 to 20 or something, like basically a very small change. And that is very low, even compared to like other, like, even compared to those science or technology universities. MIT, for example, a ratio of female students is around 45% or something. So it's just shocking how low that is, and that's the average for Tokyo University. That's including all the humanities, like all that. If you exclude that, in science and technology, it's like a single digit, which is like saying you're eliminating almost half of the talent, right, in the society, to enter, the top universities, which is very scary. And then again, the pace of change is very slow as well. So that being said, I think it's very much sad. Like, my heart hurt when I see those data. Of course, one good thing about Japan is that their data is abundant. A lot of people doing research in this, a lot of good scholars and good work that come out. And then the research data is also quite detailed. Every time I look at those data, I was shocked how detailed this research are. So all those data were published, like the status quo were discussed. But that being said, despite all that, change is very slow. So there's a very famous sociologist in Japan, Ueno Chizuko-san, and she has written abundantly about this issue in Japan. And I actually had a conversation with her about that. And then I think you can find the video here. It was, that was back then when my Japanese is still like nothing when I first came to Japan. So I was speaking Chinese and she's responding in Japanese, but then there's subtitles. And I think there are people like her kind of constantly calling out those issues, which again is a good start, right? So, because I guess the first step of solving any issue is to have the issue open in the air, in open air, and then people can see the data and discuss them. And she just basically mentioned this basically is a patriarchal society. That's in essence still what Japan is. Of course, it has, on the one hand, it's very modern, but on the other hand, this kind of paternal society backbone is still very obvious. And that's kind of connected to the first episode I talked about in terms of history is being alive. I guess it's being alive in a good way, but also being alive in a bad way, right? So it's very hard to change. And then that's also, in a way, very sad, because I think to look at any society's future, you look at two things. You look at their children. That's why I care about education. You look at their women, right? Because women, just a status in the society indicates how open and how free the society is. So looking at this too, I think Japan has a long way to go. But on the other hand, of course, they've also achieved so much already. So I do have a lot of hope. At least I have a lot of desire, I guess, for Japan to work on these issues and progress forward, because I like it as a country, and I think those issues that Japan is facing is not unique to Japan. So when Japan can figure out, a way out, given how deep those problems are, it will be a good reference for the rest of the world as well. All right, okay, so this is what I want to say, and thank you for listening to the end. Again, if you're interested in listening to my very crappy Japanese or listen to a Chinese version, you can find the links here. I've done the same topic in 3 languages, and this is the Japanese mostly for my learning, and then for English and Chinese, this is for sharing and hopefully engaging discussions as well. All right, thank you so much. Bye-bye.